Hey guys, Mr. King here. Today we're going to continue to talk about natural resources, but we're going to break them down into two different categories today. And as we've studied, a natural resource is anything that exists naturally on Earth. It does not need any human involvement to produce that item. And our natural resources can be broken down into the two categories of renewable or non-renewable. And so today we're going to talk about the difference between those two things and how we use them, and maybe the idea of wanting to use one more than another. So we've got our renewable resources first, and a renewable resource are natural resources that can be replaced in 100 years or less. And some basic examples are sun, trees, water, and wind. All of those things are available for us to use on a daily basis, and they will be for a long period of time. We're not going to run out of the sun. We won't run out of trees, no matter how much deforestation we have. As long as we continue to plant trees, they grow back within 100 years or less to the size where we can use them. Our water cycle is a continuous process that we've talked about. So you guys know, as long as we have the water cycle, we'll continue to have that evaporation, condensation, precipitation, kind of recycling that water. And then wind exists because we have differences in temperatures, and we can use the power of the wind to do different things. We can create electricity even with wind. So here they are kind of broken down. We've got the sun. Energy from the sun's renewable because it gives off light energy every day, and will continue to do that for forever, basically, from what we can measure. And so we use the sun for a variety of things. We just got done studying ecosystems and how producers began each food chain or food web, and producers use the sun to go through the process of photosynthesis. And without the sun, we wouldn't have the beginning of the food chain, which would cause our consumers to have nothing to eat, and the decomposers would have nothing to break down, and it would basically ruin our ecosystem. But the sun also provides our Earth with the amount of warmth we need to sustain life. If you do not have the sun shining, you will not have nearly enough warmth for people to sustain life, and plants would die out, and then animals die out, and everything would kind of go away. And so the sun is a very, very important natural resource. Once again, it exists without us doing anything, but it's renewable because we can use it over and over and over, and we're not going to run out. Trees are the second type of renewable resource, and trees are renewable because most of them will grow back and be cut down again in less than 100 years. And so even though you might chop down a tree, if you plant one, you still have time to grow back, and that's what makes it a renewable resource. Now, you guys have been learning in social studies about deforestation and how they've been taking away the Amazon rainforest and cutting down these trees. And we've studied enough about ecosystems where you guys should know the relationship between the trees providing a habitat for many different populations of organisms. And so by cutting down the trees, you're causing a lot of problems in those different ecosystems. So check this out. This is a little bit about deforestation and how things are kind of changing as we cut down things in the Amazon rainforest. Take care of them is just burn them down. And you can plant crops, you can raise animals.
like a heart needs a beat. It's nothing new. Yeah, I loved you with the fire red, and now it's turning blue. And say sorry like the angel heaven let me think was you. But I'm afraid it's too late to apologize. It's too late. Said it's too late to apologize. It's too late.
Decomposers in the ecosystem, they're not returning the nutrients back into the soil, and that's making the soil almost unplantable. And so it might be great for a couple of years, and the farmers and the ranchers can make a lot of money, but after a couple of years, those nutrients run out, and then they have to cut down more.
It's too late to apologize. It's too late. Said it's too late to apologize. It's too late.
This is kind of a question.
Said it's too late to apologize. It's too late.
In order for people to make money.
Said it's too late to apologize. It's too late. Holding on to rope got me 2 feet off the ground.
And if you're purchasing the land and you own the land, it's not against the law for you to plow down the trees in the land you own. Even though it destroys the habitats, that's your choice. And so that's the big question about where do we draw the line? Where do people have to say, no, no, no more? You're killing the habitats, and it doesn't matter how much money you make. It's about saving the rainforest for its species and the real diverse ecosystem it is. And that's a debate that's going on, and a lot of different challenges are being issued in that debate back and forth between people who really want to conserve the land and people who want to produce crops and cattle to feed people. And so that's a tough thing to find the balance to where you can preserve land, but you can also raise crops as well. So water is another renewable resource, and you guys know enough about the water cycle that's been used over and over again on Earth, and that process will continue. Once again, we're talking about renewable resources, so that's something that we'll have all the time, because we will always have evaporation, because the water molecules will always warm and go from a liquid into a gas and evaporate. And once they get up in the air, our atmosphere will always cool it, and they'll condense, and then we'll have too much precipitate or too much gas, water vapor up in the air, and then we'll get precipitation. And that process happens on and on and on. Wind is the last of the renewable resources we'll talk about. And wind's renewable because it can be used again and again. And like we've discussed, wind is just when you have differences in temperature. And we've talked about how Tornado Alley, as they call it in the United States, is kind of right in the middle of the United States, because you have warm air coming up from Mexico and from down south, and then you have cold air coming down from Canada. And where those two different types of air masses meet, that's how you get tornadoes, because the bigger the difference, the stronger the wind. So on days that are really windy, it's because we've had a really hot day and now we're having a really cold day, or vice versa. And we can use that wind to spin these turbines and create electricity. So those are renewable ones. Those are ones that can come back over and over, and we can use those. Now we're going to talk about the non-renewable resources, things that we're kind of going to run out of. And non-renewable resources are resources that cannot be replaced by natural processes within 100 years or less. And some examples of those are coal, crude oil, and natural gas. So these are things we have a limited supply of. Remember, natural resources are resources that occur naturally by themselves without any people being involved. And so these resources, the non-renewable ones, they're not going to come back within 100 years. So these are kind of our valuable resources. These are ones that we want to try not to use, because you can't use an endless supply of coal. There's only so much in the earth. So how do they form? These things, we've talked about the renewable, like a tree can grow back in the water cycle and things like that. The non-renewable resources form slowly over long periods of time. And we're talking way over 100 years. We're talking more like millions of years for new ones to form. And they're still natural resources because they form on their own, but they just take a really long time to form. And so we try not to use those. Use them and lose them. When we use up non-renewable resources, it can take millions of years for new ones to form. And here's a quick little video about how some of those non-renewable resources form. And you can see in this video, it'll show you the amount of time. We call it million-year-old treasures because that's literally how long it takes.
You find it here, here, and even here. Crude oil and natural gas are stored in many different regions around the world. Why is that? As diverse as the world's regions are, they share the same origins. To understand how crude oil was formed, we have to go back about 200 million years in time. Ancient seas cover almost the entire globe. The continents as we know them today do not yet exist. The prehistoric underwater world is teeming with organic life forms, bacteria, algae, and microorganisms. When they die, they sink to the seabed. There they mix with other sediments. Since there is no oxygen, there is no decomposition process. The so-called bedrock of crude oil is formed. Over time, other rock layers form on top of the bedrock. These weigh down on the bedrock, pressing it together. The pressure generates heat. At temperatures of 60 to 120 degrees Celsius, crude oil is formed. If the temperature rises to over 150 degrees, natural gas is also formed. The oil droplets are small and have a very low density. Since they are light, they rise up until they meet the impermeable rock strata. The so-called reservoirs are formed beneath geological boundary layers made of clay or salt rock. Where millions of years ago there were oceans, today we have Libya, the Middle East, Siberia, or Germany. That is the reason why we find crude oil in so many different regions of the world.
So basically what happens is you have an organism, either a plant or an animal or something that dies, and when it dies, it gets buried in sediment, maybe those sand or dirt that gets covered on top of it. And as it piles up on top of it, the pressure over time basically changes the solid into a liquid. From all that heat and all that pressure squeezing down on it, it becomes a liquid. And that liquid that it forms over time becomes crude oil. And if it's hot enough, it can even go from a liquid to a gas, and that's natural gas. But this is a process that takes literally millions of years for it to happen. To make those buried that deep and get that much pressure, you can imagine the amount of pressure that has to be on top of it. It's got to kind of be stacked on top of it to kind of crush it down and make it hot enough to actually change from either a solid to a liquid or a liquid to a gas. So with that in mind, we have to think about how can we make these things last longer. If they take millions of years to form, we don't want to get rid of all of them because we're going to run out of them. So conservation is the idea that we protect and preserve natural resources so they'll always be available. And you guys know the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. That's a really important part of the process, is you reduce how much you use of non-renewable resources and you reuse them if possible over and over. And recycling, use them in a different form. And if we can do that, then we can make those last a lot longer. Now, if we just continue to use them up without worrying about them, we're going to run out. And when we run out, we're going to have to find some different ways to power our life. Coal is one of the most commonly used forms to create electricity in the world. And if we run out of coal, we're going to have to figure out another way to do it. And to produce electricity, obviously people depend on that a lot. All right, guys, so just the basic idea. We've got natural resources divided into 2 groups. We've got renewable and non-renewable. And the renewable will come back in 100 years or less. The non-renewable won't. So we got to be careful with those. Hope you guys have a great night. Write some good questions. Take that quiz, and I'll see you tomorrow.